My life took a sharp turn into chaos about a year ago, and I need to get this off my chest. I never imagined I'd be sharing this on a forum, but that's what happens when your family unravels, and you're left wondering how it all went so wrong. So, let me start at the beginning, because this is one of those situations where you just have to ask, how did this happen? My close acquaintance Ethan has a sibling, Clara. I've known them both for ages. We grew up in the same close-knit community, sometimes spending time together. Nothing significant, right? Clara was always a bit different. I don't want to sound insensitive, but she had some mental health challenges. I wasn't privy to all the specifics, and it wasn't my place to inquire. Ethan rarely spoke about it, and I respected that, but everyone was aware Clara had her struggles. Anyway, about a year ago, seemingly out of nowhere, Clara informs me she's expecting a child. Okay, that's news, right? Except for one crucial detail. She tells me I'm the father. At that moment, I swear my mind went. I was like, wait, what? Now, let me be unequivocally clear about this. I've never even shared a platonic embrace with Clara, let alone been, intimate with her, not even once. So, for her to present me with this unfounded claim, I was at a loss for words. I told her plainly, Clara, I don't know what you're talking about, but there's absolutely no way I'm the father. We've never been close in that way. And she just kept repeating it as if somehow I was going to magically recall an event that never occurred. It was utterly perplexing. I tried to remain composed, thinking perhaps this was related to her mental health difficulties or something, but deep down, I was panicking. Now, this is where things start to go awry. Clara refuses to undergo a prenatal parentage test. I'm sitting there thinking, if you're so certain it's my child, why wouldn't you simply take the test and substantiate it? But she wouldn't budge. She kept saying things like, you need to be present for your child and you're abandoning us before the baby's even born. It was a barrage of guilt, and I wasn't buying it. So I made it clear, if she wasn't going to take the test, I wasn't going to sign any documents. I wasn't about to become legally bound to a child that wasn't mine. Simple, right? I assumed that would be the end of it. Boy, was I mistaken. Enter the family drama. A few weeks later, my guardians discover the situation. Now, I cherish my guardians, but they have a very traditional set of values. And the moment they hear about this, they become enraged, like completely enraged. They're hurling insults, calling me irresponsible and a disappointment. And I'm just standing there trying to interject, but not listening. I told them, Mom, Dad, this isn't my child. Clara's fabricating this. But they weren't receptive. It's as if once they fixated on the idea that I was responsible for this baby, they couldn't let it go. There were many heated arguments after that. Things were said that I likely can't take back. And frankly, I'm still resentful about it. My guardians kept pressuring me to do the right thing and step up as a father, even though I repeatedly told them it wasn't my child. It didn't matter to them. In their eyes, I was already culpable. They said they didn't raise me to be some kind of neglectful parent, and they couldn't believe I would deny my own offspring. Here's where things get even more bizarre. I wasn't even in the same region when Clara would have conceived. That's right. She was staying at a friend's residence for an entire month when she supposedly became pregnant. I brought this up to my guardians, and they just dismissed it. People make mistakes, they said. Yeah, well, this wasn't just a mistake. This was a full-blown accusation that could destroy my life. Fast forward to about 6 months into Clara's pregnancy. By this point, the entire family has turned against me. Every family gathering, every phone call, every message, it's all about how I need to step up and accept responsibility for this baby. I was losing my sanity. It was like I was trapped in some nightmare, and regardless of what I said or did, nobody believed me. My close friends were mostly supportive, thankfully, but even a couple of them started to express doubts, like, are you sure, man? Maybe you don't recall something? Finally, my guardians delivered the ultimate ultimatum. If I don't step up and act like a father, they're cutting me out of their lives, disowning me and evicting me. At first I thought they were bluffing, but no, they were completely serious. They told me explicitly that if I didn't comply, I was no longer welcome in the family, and sure enough, when I didn't disown me. Let me tell you, that was painful. I was angry, bewildered, and simply hurt. These were the people who raised me, who were supposed to support me, and they chose to believe someone else over me. My own family expelled me as if I didn't matter. It was devastating. Things got even stranger after the baby was born. My mother figure was there at the medical facility, playing the role of proud grandparent. I didn't even know until later. Clara still wouldn't consent to the parentage test, so I had to navigate some legal procedures to get it done. When the results came in, guess what? Not my child. 0% chance I was the father. And as soon as I received that document, I felt a wave of relief and anger simultaneously. I forwarded the results to my guardians, thinking, finally, they'll see the truth. They'll realize they were wrong and everything will return to normal. Nope. Instead, they started inundating my communication devices with apologies, offers of financial compensation, and pleading with me to forgive them. My father figure even transferred a few hundred units of currency, as if that would rectify things. But here's the thing, I kept the money. Yeah, I accepted it. I felt like they owed me for all the hardship they caused. But forgive them? No way. I made it clear that if they were willing to disown me over something like this, I wasn't going to risk exposing myself to that kind of betrayal again. Most of my friends were supportive, but a few, along with my therapist, started suggesting things like, maybe you should give them another chance. They're your guardians after all, and I understand, I truly do. But how do you simply forgive someone who is ready to discard you so readily? How do you trust someone who believed a falsehood over their own ward? That's where I stand now, torn between knowing I did nothing wrong and contemplating whether I should even attempt to mend things with my family. But every time I consider it, I recall how quickly they turned on me, and I can't shake the feeling that they failed me when I needed them most. Alright, so after everything that transpired with my guardians and Clara's baby predicament, you'd assume things would settle down, right? Nope. Life had different plans for me. If anything, the whole mess just continued to escalate. You'd think proving I wasn't the father would have been the end of it. But man, I wish it were that simple. It turns out, when people are unwilling to admit their mistakes, they'll resort to anything to avoid taking responsibility. So after the parentage test results were revealed and confirmed I wasn't the father, I thought, all right, now my guardians will realize they were mistaken and maybe things can return to normal. But instead of the relief I was anticipating, things became significantly more complicated. Firstly, Clara completely unraveled. She started spreading rumors around the community that I had fabricated the test or somehow manipulated it. Yeah, you read that correctly. In her mind, I had somehow persuaded an entire laboratory to falsify the results in my favor. Like, how would I even accomplish that? I'm just an ordinary individual. I'm not some mastermind who knows how to manipulate DNA tests. But Clara wasn't listening. She was determined to portray me as the villain in her narrative. She went around telling people that I was abandoning her and the baby, that I'd deceived everyone into believing I wasn't the father. It didn't make sense, but it didn't matter. People started to believe her. Small community rumors spread rapidly, and soon I had people giving me disapproving glances at the market, as if I were some kind of degenerate. I even had people directly confront me asking why I wasn't stepping up to care for my child. It was infuriating. I had the test results to prove I wasn't the father, but no one seemed to care. Clara was playing the victim and I was being blamed for something I had no involvement in. I'd never felt so powerless in my life. It's one thing when your family betrays you, but when the entire community starts to view you as the antagonist, that hits differently. And my guardians? Well, they were still attempting to be cordial, but it was evident they didn't know how to handle the situation either. My mother figure kept contacting me, leaving these lengthy emotional voicemails about how she simply wanted her family reunited. She didn't even acknowledge what had occurred. She simply wanted to gloss over everything as if nothing had ever happened. She even suggested I come over for a meal, as if that was going to magically repair all the damage they'd inflicted. It wasn't just awkward. It was insulting. After everything they put me through, they assumed a few family meals and some insincere smiles would make everything right. No apology, no acknowledgement of how severely they messed up. Just, let's move on. It was as if they didn't even comprehend how much trust they had destroyed. And that's the crux of the matter. Once trust is broken like that, it's not something you can simply patch up with a meal and a hug. It requires genuine effort, real commitment to rebuild, and they weren't even willing to concede they were wrong. The final blow came when my father figure tried to bribe me. He outright sent me a digital message offering to purchase a new vehicle if I would return to the family. Like what? They think they can simply buy my forgiveness? It was so disconnected from reality that I didn't even know how to respond. I just stared at the message for a while, trying to determine if this was some kind of cruel joke. But no, my father figure was serious. I didn't reply. I couldn't. What do you even say to something like that? They didn't care about rectifying things in a proper manner. They simply wanted me back in their lives because it was convenient for them. And the fact that they thought throwing money at me would resolve everything, it made me realize how little they actually grasped what they'd done. But the worst part transpired later, when I discovered Clara had started contacting people I knew, attempting to involve them in her drama. She even contacted my former romantic partner, Genevieve, and tried to persuade her that I was this terrible person who had abandoned his child. Genevieve and I hadn't communicated in years, but suddenly I receive a message from her stating, "We need to talk." At first, I had no idea what she was referring to, but when she explained that Clara had been messaging her, trying to reignite old conflicts, I nearly lost my temper. I contacted Clara and instructed her to stop. I was done with the games, done with the falsehoods, and I wasn't going to allow her to drag my friends and former partners into her mess. But she simply laughed and ended the communication. It was like speaking to an inanimate object. She was so consumed by her fabricated reality that nothing I said would penetrate her. At this point, I was seriously contemplating seeking legal counsel. I didn't want to take it that far, but what choice did I have? Clara was damaging my reputation, my guardians were enabling her behaviour, and I felt like I had no allies. My closest friends were supportive, of course, but even they didn't fully grasp the extent of how dire things had become. Eventually, I had to make a decision. I couldn't continue living in this constant state of stress, anticipating the next rumour or the next wild accusation. I decided to sever ties completely, not just with Clara, but with my guardians as well. It wasn't easy. It was actually painful, but I knew I couldn't keep allowing them to bring me down. I sent my guardians a lengthy digital correspondence explaining everything, how I felt betrayed, how they had failed me, how I couldn't trust them anymore. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told them plainly that I wasn't prepared to forgive them, and I didn't know if I ever would be. I told them that if they wanted any chance at a relationship with me in the future, they'd have to begin by genuinely apologizing and accepting responsibility for their actions. No more pretending everything was fine, no more sweeping things under the rug. As for Clara, I blocked her on all platforms. I couldn't endure her manipulations any longer. She wasn't my concern, and I wasn't going to let her continue to drag me into her chaos. I even had to inform Ethan, her brother, that I couldn't be around his family for a while. That was difficult because Ethan's always been a good friend, but I had to prioritize my own well-being. It's been a few months since I cut them off, and truthfully, it's been a relief. Sure, there are moments when I feel guilty or second-guess myself, but overall, I know I made the right decision. Sometimes you have to walk away, even when it's challenging. And yes, it's messy and complicated, but at least now I'm not constantly looking over my shoulder waiting for the next disaster to strike. I can finally breathe again. But man, if you had told me a year ago that this is where I'd end up, I never would have believed you. Life's unpredictable, I suppose. Update 1. Alright, so here's where things get even more peculiar. I thought severing ties with Clara and my guardians would be the conclusion of the turmoil. Like I assumed once I removed them from my existence, everything would calm down and I could move forward. But naturally, things don't unfold that smoothly. Cutting them off was merely the commencement of a whole new ordeal. A couple of weeks after I sent that digital correspondence to my guardians and blocked Clara, I received this unexpected message from a former acquaintance from my formative years, Caleb. We hadn't communicated in years, but out of nowhere, he's asking if I'm doing all right. Initially, I'm thinking, okay, that's random, but then he informs me that my guardians contacted him. Now, Caleb and I weren't even that close back in the day, so for my guardians to reach out to him, that was a significant red flag. Apparently, they'd been going around attempting to persuade people to speak to me on their behalf. I'm referring to old acquaintances, distant relations, even individuals I barely know. They were telling everyone that I was in a difficult situation and that they were concerned about me. It was as if they were trying to portray me as the one who was unstable. And the worst aspect? They were framing the entire situation as if I was the one who needed to apologize for cutting them off. Caleb was understanding about it. He knew something was amiss and wanted to give me a heads up, but it didn't end there. Over the next few days, I started receiving messages from various individuals, people I hadn't spoken to in years, people I'd only met briefly. They were all conveying the same sentiment. Your guardians are really worried about you, or you should give them another chance. It was absurd. They had somehow convinced all these people that I was the antagonist in this scenario, that I had lost my grip and needed to make amends. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, simply trying to progress with my life, and my guardians were conducting a full-scale public relations campaign, attempting to make me appear as the villain. I felt as if I was in some kind of bizarre alternate reality where nothing made sense. Regardless of how much I tried to distance myself from the drama, it just kept returning to me. The final straw occurred when they contacted my supervisor. Yes, you heard that correctly. My guardians contacted my place of employment. I don't even know how they obtained the contact information, but they somehow tracked down my supervisor's contact details and contacted the office, stating they were concerned about me and that I wasn't in the right frame of mind. Can you imagine how humiliating that was? My supervisor called me into their office one day, looking very serious, and asked if everything was all right at home. I was speechless. I didn't even know what to say initially. Like, what do you say when your supervisor is asking if your guardians believe you've gone off the deep end? Explained the entire situation to them, and fortunately, they were incredibly understanding about it. They even apologized for bringing it up. But man, the damage was done. My own guardians were now attempting to interfere with my employment. It felt as if they were determined to sabotage everything for me simply because I wouldn't conform to their desires. Following that, I had no alternative. I consulted a legal professional and initiated the process of obtaining a protective order against them. I didn't want to escalate matters to that extent, but what choice did I have? They were interfering with my career, my friendships, my peace of mind. I had to safeguard myself, even if it entailed legally severing ties with them. The process was lengthy and stressful. There were court appearances, paperwork, and a significant amount of anxiety that accompanied it. But simultaneously, I experienced a strange sense of relief, like finally I was taking control of the situation. No more allowing them to infiltrate every aspect of my life. No more allowing them to manipulate the narrative. Naturally, when they discovered the protective order, all chaos ensued. My mother figure sent me a lengthy guilt-laden message about how she never imagined her own offspring would do this, and how family is supposed to remain united regardless of the circumstances. She kept reiterating that I was fracturing the family, that I was the source of all the pain. It was textbook manipulation, but I didn't succumb. I didn't respond. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but things deteriorated further before they improved. One day, I returned home from work to find my property damaged. Someone had etched a derogatory word into the side of it. I had no evidence that it was my guardians, but come on, who else would it be? I hadn't disclosed the protective order to anyone except a few close confidants. My guardians were the only ones who had a motive to perpetrate such an act. It was as if they couldn't handle relinquishing control, so they had to retaliate in any way possible. I filed a report with law enforcement, but nothing ever materialized. Just another reminder that even when you strive to do things correctly, sometimes the people who are supposed to cherish you the most can become your worst adversaries. I began storing my personal items at a friend's residence after that, just to be safe. I couldn't take any more risks. I even installed surveillance systems around my dwelling in case they attempted anything else. It felt as if I was living in a perpetual state of paranoia, always anticipating the next disaster. But eventually, things began to stabilise. The protective order was granted, and my guardians were officially prohibited from contacting me or approaching my residence or workplace. It was a tremendous weight lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could finally breathe. It's been several months now, and I'm still piecing things back together. I had to engage in significant damage control with my friends and colleagues, explaining the entire situation to them and ensuring they understood the truth. Most of them were supportive, but a few were skeptical, like, "Are you certain your guardians would really go that far?" I understand, it's difficult to believe, but when you've experienced it firsthand, you comprehend the lengths to which some people will go when they feel they're losing control. In retrospect, I never imagined things would escalate to this extent. It's astonishing how rapidly family can turn against you when you refuse to adhere to their rules. But I've learned a valuable lesson through all of this. You cannot allow anyone, not even your family, to dictate how you live your life. Sometimes you must make the difficult choice to walk away, even when it causes pain. I don't know what the future holds for me and my guardians. Perhaps one day they'll acknowledge their actions and offer a genuine apology, perhaps not. But regardless, I'm finished allowing them to control my life. I have my own path to pursue, and I'm not looking back. Alright, so here's where things take a slight detour. After I finally obtained the protective order and began attempting to rebuild my life, I thought things would finally settle down. But, as expected, life had other plans. Just when I was starting to feel as though I could breathe again, my guardians discovered a new method to disrupt my life. This time, it wasn't direct contact. It wasn't damaging my property or sending messages. No, this was an entirely different level of chaos. So one day, I'm at my dwelling, simply minding my own business, when I receive a communication in my mailbox. Nothing too unusual about that, right? Except this communication is from a legal representative. At first, I assumed it was something related to the protective order, perhaps some final documentation or something. But no, it was a legal action. My own guardians were initiating legal action against me. For what, you ask? Emotional distress. I couldn't even comprehend what I was reading. They were actually suing me for severing ties with them, alleging that my actions had caused them significant emotional harm and that they were entitled to compensation. They even asserted that I had alienated them from the rest of the family, which was utter nonsense because they were the ones who isolated me, not the other way around. I sat there for several minutes, simply staring at the communication, attempting to process what was occurring. I mean, who does that? Who sues their own offspring because they're upset about being cut off? I didn't even know what to do. Part of me wanted to laugh at how ridiculous it all was, but another part of me was seriously stressed. This wasn't merely family conflict anymore. This was legal, and it was about to become very complicated. I contacted my legal counsel immediately. I couldn't handle this on my own. They were just as shocked as I was. They'd witnessed numerous messy family cases, but suing your own offspring for emotional distress. That was unprecedented, even for them. We reviewed the details of the legal action, and while most of it was clearly unfounded, I knew we couldn't simply ignore it. They were serious, and that meant I had to defend myself. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, communications, and anxiety. I had to compile all the evidence of everything that had transpired. The parentage test results, the protective order, the harassment I'd been enduring. My legal counsel was confident we could prevail, but it still felt surreal that it had come to this. My own guardians were attempting to drag me through the legal system, all because I refused to allow them to control me any longer. But here's the thing. They didn't stop at just the legal action. Oh no. They had to take it a step further. They began contacting other family members, attempting to turn them against me. I started receiving messages from extended family, all people I hadn't heard from in years. They were all conveying the same sentiment. why can't you simply reconcile with your guardians? Or family is everything, you're being selfish. It was as if they'd been brainwashed into believing I was the villain in all of this. I was furious, not just at my guardians, but at the entire situation. It felt as if regardless of what I did, regardless of how diligently I tried to protect myself, they always discovered a way to twist the narrative and portray me as the antagonist. I mean, how do you explain to someone who's only hearing one side of the story that your guardians are suing you for emotional distress because you enforced boundaries? It reached a point where I had to sever ties with even more people. I blocked family members, removed connections on social media, and simply severed any connection to that aspect of my life. It wasn't because I didn't care about them, I did, but I couldn't continue explaining myself repeatedly to people who had already made up their minds. It was exhausting, and I was finished attempting to justify my decisions to people who were unwilling to see the bigger picture. Eventually, the court date arrived. I appeared with my legal counsel, prepared for whatever nonsense they were going to present. And let me tell you, it was a spectacle. My guardians had this elaborate sob story prepared about how they'd always been there for me, how they'd attempted to support me through difficult times, and how I had cruelly severed ties with them without reason. They portrayed themselves as the victims in all of this, which honestly impressive considering they were the ones who disowned me in the first place. But my legal counsel wasn't having it. They dismantled their arguments piece by piece, presenting to the judge all the evidence of their harassment, the protective order, the parentage test, everything. It was brutal. And by the end of it, you could see the judge wasn't buying their narrative. The judge ruled in my favour, obviously. The legal action was dismissed, and my guardians were ordered to pay my legal expenses, which was a minor victory in the grand scheme of things. But even though I prevailed, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like I had just barely escaped a harrowing experience, and there was still so much fallout to address. Following the legal proceedings, my guardians made one final, desperate attempt to re-enter my life. They sent me a lengthy, emotional communication about how they were sorry for everything, how they simply wanted me to rectify things, and how they couldn't bear to lose me. It was the same old guilt-tripping nonsense they'd been pulling from the beginning, and honestly, I didn't even respond. I'd already made my decision. I wasn't returning. There's only so much someone can endure before they have to walk away for good. And yes, it hurt. Cutting off your family isn't easy, regardless of how dire things become. But sometimes it's necessary for your own sanity. I couldn't continue allowing them to drag me into their chaos, regardless of how much they claimed to love me. Their version of love was toxic, and I wasn't going to let it poison my life any longer. So that's where I stand now. The legal action is behind me, the protective order is still in effect, and I'm moving forward. It hasn't been easy, but I'm learning how to live without all the noise, without the constant stress of wondering when the next disaster is going to strike. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I have some control over my life. And that feels pretty damn good. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day things will change, maybe they won't. But right now I'm focusing on myself, on rebuilding the parts of my life that they tried to tear down. It's been a long road, but I'm finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Update 3. Alright, so if you've been keeping up with everything so far, you'd think after the legal action mess and the protective order, that'd be the end of the madness. But nope, my family found a way to surprise me one last time. And this one? Honestly, it left me shaking my head because I didn't think they could sink any lower. But here we are. So, a couple of months after the court ruled in my favour, things had finally started to calm down. I had severed ties with everyone causing me stress. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I could actually focus on rebuilding my life. No random messages from old friends, no letters from legal representatives, just peace. Or at least, that's what I thought. One day, I'm out running some errands, just doing normal stuff like grocery shopping, when I bump into my cousin Bethany. Now, Bethany and I hadn't talked much during all this drama. We were never super close growing up, but we'd always gotten along. So when I saw her, I figured, well, why not say hi? We ended up chatting for a bit, and at first it was pretty normal. You know, catching up on life, work, the usual stuff. But then, out of nowhere, she hits me with, "Hey, did you hear what your guardians are planning?" I froze. "Planning?" I asked, suddenly feeling that familiar pit in my stomach. Bethany looked a little uncomfortable, like she wasn't sure if she should even be telling me, but she sighed and went on, "Yeah, they're throwing a big family gathering next month. Apparently, they've been telling everyone they're hoping it'll be a reconciliation thing between you and them." I couldn't believe it. They were seriously planning some kind of ambush gathering to try and force me back into the family? I asked Bethany for more details, and it turned out they were inviting everyone. Distant relatives, family friends, people I hadn't seen in years. And the kicker, that they'd been telling everyone that I'd be there, acting like I was in on this whole thing. I was furious. I hadn't agreed to anything, and now they were setting me up to look like the bad guy if I didn't show up. It was another classic move from my guardians. Manipulate the situation, make me look like the villain, and try to guilt-trip me into doing what they wanted. I thanked Bethany for letting me know, and told her straight up that I wasn't going. She understood, but even she seemed a little torn, like she was buying into my guardians' "we just want to fix things" narrative. I could see it in her face. She wanted me to go, to make things right. But after everything they'd done, there was no way I was walking into that trap. I went home that night and thought long and hard about what to do. I knew I wasn't going to the gathering, but part of me felt like I needed to say something. I couldn't just ignore this. So I decided to send one final message to my guardians, laying everything out once and for all. The next morning, I sat down and wrote them an email. It wasn't long, but it was direct. I told them that I knew about the gathering and that I wasn't coming. I made it clear that I didn't want to be a part of any reconciliation that was being forced on me, especially not in front of a crowd of people. I told them that if they really cared about fixing things, they'd have to start by respecting my boundaries, and until they could do that, there was nothing more to talk about. I didn't expect a response, and honestly, I didn't need one. I just needed to set the record straight one last time. But of course, my guardians couldn't just let it go. A few days later, my father figure called me. I didn't pick up, but he left this long, rambling voicemail about how I was tearing the family apart and how this gathering was supposed to be a fresh start for all of us. He even tried to guilt me by saying, "Your elders would be so disappointed in how you're handling this." That voicemail hit me hard. Not because I believed it, but because it reminded me of all the times my guardians had used guilt and manipulation to get their way. They'd pull any card they could to make me feel like I was the problem, even if it meant dragging my elders into it. People who had always been supportive of me, by the way. It was like they couldn't accept that maybe, just maybe, they were the ones who needed to take a long, hard look at themselves. I didn't respond to the voicemail. What was the point? I'd said my piece, and I wasn't going to let them pull me back into their drama. But that didn't mean it didn't weigh on me. For days after that, I kept thinking about the gathering, about all the relatives who were going to be there, thinking I was just refusing to make peace. I wondered how many of them actually knew the full story, how many were getting the twisted version my guardians were feeding them. The gathering came and went, and I didn't hear a word from my guardians afterward. I saw some photos on social media, happy faces, family hugs, the whole deal. My guardians were smiling, acting like everything was fine, like they hadn't just spent the last year trying to destroy my life. It was weird seeing them like that, pretending everything was perfect. It was like they were living in some alternate reality where they were the innocent victims and I was the unreasonable, unforgiving child. But I knew the truth. I knew what they had done, and I knew I had made the right choice. After the gathering, a strange sort of quiet settled over my life. It was as if the final, desperate attempt to pull me back into their orbit had finally exhausted them. Or maybe, just maybe, they had finally realized that I wasn't going to play their games anymore. Whatever the reason, the constant barrage of drama, the relentless attempts to manipulate me, had finally ceased. I started to focus on rebuilding my life, on creating a sense of normalcy that had been absent for far too long. I spent more time with my friends, the ones who had stood by me through everything. We went on hikes, had game nights, and just enjoyed each other's company. It was a simple pleasure, but after everything I had been through, it felt like a luxury. I also threw myself into my work. I found a renewed sense of purpose in my career, a way to channel my energy into something positive and productive. I took on new challenges, learned new skills, and found a sense of satisfaction in my accomplishments. It was a way to prove to myself that I wasn't defined by the chaos that had consumed my life. There were still moments, of course, when the memories would surface, when the anger and hurt would resurface, but I was learning to manage those feelings, to acknowledge them without letting them control me. I started journaling, writing down my thoughts and emotions, processing the experiences that had shaped me. It was a way to give voice to my pain, to release the burdens I had been carrying. I also started seeing a new therapist, someone who specialized in family trauma. They helped me understand the dynamics of my relationship with my guardians, the patterns of manipulation and control that had shaped our interactions. They gave me tools to cope with the lingering effects of the trauma, to build healthy boundaries, and to cultivate self-compassion. It was a slow process, a gradual journey of healing and self-discovery. There were setbacks, moments when I felt like I was taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But I persisted, determined to reclaim my life, to create a future that was defined by my own choices, not by the actions of others. One day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Bethany, my cousin. She wrote about the family gathering, about how awkward and strained it had been. She said that many people had asked about me, and that my guardians had given vague, evasive answers. She also mentioned that some of the older relatives had expressed their concern, questioning why I wasn't there. Bethany wrote that she had finally told some of the relatives the truth about the parentage test, the harassment, the legal action, and the protective order. She said that many of them were shocked, that they had no idea what had really happened. She apologized for not speaking up sooner, for allowing herself to be swayed by my guardian's narrative. The letter brought a strange sense of closure. It was a validation of my experiences, a recognition that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't the villain in this story. It was a reminder that even in the midst of chaos and betrayal, there were people who cared, who were willing to listen, and who were capable of understanding. I didn't respond to Bethany's letter immediately. I needed time to process it, to absorb the weight of her words. But eventually, I wrote her back. I thanked her for her honesty, for her courage in speaking the truth. I told her that I appreciated her support and that I was grateful for her understanding. I didn't know what the future held for me and my extended family. I didn't know if they would ever fully understand what had happened, or if they would ever accept my decision to distance myself from my guardians. But I knew that I had made the right choice, that I had protected myself from further harm. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The quiet that had settled over my life wasn't just the absence of drama. It was a quietness of peace, of self-acceptance, of inner strength. It was the sound of my own voice, finally free from the echoes of deceit. And it was a sound that I cherished, a sound that I knew would guide me forward towards a future of my own making.